All right. I am excited today. What is going on? What is going on? What is going on, everybody? I am very excited today. We have a good conversation ahead of us. If you are seeing this live, that means you are in the right place at the right time because, like I said, today is going to be a great conversation. Let's go ahead and we're going to dive in. I'm excited to have this conversation. With my friend Leonard Lucas. Leonard, if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself and where you are today, and we'll keep the conversation going.
Well, again, my name is Leonard Lucas. I've practiced law now going on 23, 24 years. And I've done various things. I've litigated in insurance defense. I've worked for a construction law boutique. I've been a assistant U.S. attorney or federal prosecutor. I've worked in D.C. I've worked in Memphis. Uh, for many years, I was an attorney with the U.S. General Services Administration, which is pretty much the largest contractor, civilian contractor in the country, government contract, not military, in the country. And so I did that for many, many years, litigating large cases, dealing with federal contracts. And now, and I've also been an attorney in a corporate setting. Now I work for myself. I represent small businesses, and I also litigate, including some federal criminal defense.
Very cool, very cool. So this is going to be a exciting conversation, and we're going to try to go as deep as we can in the time that we have, uh, which we are not going to be here for a long time, but we are definitely going to have a good time for sure. If you are just joining us, Leonard and I are about to dive straight into a topic of discussion that I think is very important, and that is, are you ready for corporate formation and the importance of separation? I was just telling Leonard the reason this came about is because oftentimes entrepreneurs, we are extremely excited to get started with our business, but we actually don't even take the time to understand what that means when I go get an LLC or when I go start an S corp or a nonprofit or whatever the case may be. So we're about to dive into that. And hello to everybody joining us. Drop your name in the chat if you're joining us. Hey Shane, I see you joining us. Thank you for joining. I see a few others and I see some hearts and likes coming through. So that's exciting. But Leonard, let's hop in and let's start first talking about why to even form a legal entity in the first place.
So one of the big things that owners are going to face is ultimately the more risk you sort of accumulate, you're going to need to protect yourself. And one of the things that you have at your disposal, a tool that you have at your disposal, is what we call a corporate shield. And what the corporate shield is when you create a legal entity, that legal entity will now take on the liability for the business activity, and you shield your own personal fortune from any risk. Now, obviously, that comes with certain requirements that you have to meet, but for the most part, the number one reason why you want to create an entity is to protect yourself from risk.
Well, hold on, Leonard. For instance, for example, here I'm just playing devil's advocate. I'm a sole prop. I'm doing well. I don't haven't ran into any issues yet, but is there a dilemma with me being a sole proprietor?
No, there's no dilemma at all. I think what you have to, everybody has to sort of balance it. And the more risk you incur, the more you're gonna need to protect yourself. For instance, risk can be you sign a lease. Risk can be you hire employees. Risk can be you enter into contracts with vendors. Um, when you're entering into those contracts, when you're entering into those employee relationships, when you're signing a lease, you're doing all that. If you're a sole proprietor, you're doing all that on your own personal um, tab. And so
Hmm.
any risk that incurs from that is coming to you personally, not the company.
Hmm. Yeah. So So for instance, and we don't have to dive too deep into this, but say for instance, a person is there's one entrepreneur selling food, but there is another entrepreneur, just I guess doing some consulting work. And they're not, they can't really, I guess, hinder anybody health wise or whatnot. Is it more important for the consultant to get covered, or more important for the food person to get covered, or both of them?
It really depends on several issues. Like for instance, the number one issue it depends on in terms of the consultant is what is he a consultant on. If he's a consultant, for instance, in the financial industry, and you're consulting people on investing their money, and individuals decide that because of your that you said something to them that may have caused them to, whether you did or you didn't, that would have caused them to have lost a substantial amount of money. Well, there's a lot of risk there. In the food industry, yes, obviously, if your food, for whatever reason, people get sick
Mhm.
with the food that you're preparing and that you've delivered or that you provide or served, yes, you're going to have you'll have an issue there with liability. Like I said, the real issue comes is you have to do a risk assessment, and you got to look at what what you look at what could potentially happen with a lease. Your risk assessment may be, what if I have to break this lease early? What if
Mhm.
something happens with the business and I can no longer afford to pay my rent? Um, or what if I grow and I outgrow this lease and I need
Mhm.
to go and get more space? So
Mhm.
you gotta, when I say risk, you've got to really do a risk assessment. Excuse me. You just have to do a risk assessment on these things and weigh whether or not you should go ahead and get an entity.
Very cool, very cool. If you are just joining us, Leonard and I have just started to scratch the surface as far as, are you ready for corporate formation and the importance of separation? Shout out to Carlisa. I see you joining us. Kay, what's going on? Sarah Jones, Diamond, how you doing? CC. So if y'all have questions, drop them in the chat. As I said last time on my lunch and learn last week, my legal friend is in the chat helping me out here. So if you have a question, pop it in there. If you're not sure whether to stay, being a sole proprietor, if you're not sure whether you should be a LLC, or hey, I started LLC, should I go back to sole prop? Now is the time to ask, and Leonard can give us a little advice on which direction he thinks that we should go in. So, and guys, be patient. One thing we are going to talk about is money. I know everybody wants to talk about, why should I do it? Is it, what is it going to cost me? What is it not going to cost me? And we'll get into that in just a second. So, I guess the next thing we should maybe dive into, speaking of that, is what form of entity should you choose?
So obviously, like you've discussed previously, we have a lot of people are sole proprietors to begin, and then we have general partnerships as well. Sole proprietors, general partnerships, um, you really don't file anything to be a sole proprietor or a general partnership. You can and you should file a fictitious name if you're operating as a DBA, for instance. You should file your name, but you can operate as a doing business as, and but in terms of a general partnership, which the only difference between a sole proprietorship is two or more
Hmm.
people. Um, if you're going to be in a general partnership, one thing I would recommend is that you have a written agreement between you and the partner. You don't need it.
Hmm.
You don't have to have it to have a general partnership. But if something ever goes, again, you got to assess risk. If something ever goes wrong, people tend to forget why we entered into this partnership. People tend to forget how much I put in, how much you put in,
Mm.
how much effort you put in, how much effort I put in to creating this business, and that's when you get into issues. So you should definitely have a written agreement if you're going to be in a general partnership, but that doesn't have to be filed. It's not the entity is just um, a general partnership is just two or more people decide to orally. You can do it orally, you can do a written agreement, go into business with one another.
Yeah, hold that thought, Leonard. So that gets real dicey right there. Partnerships. I know a lot of people they get into a partnership, and I think it's vital for us to really mention that choose your partner, I guess, wisely. Or make sure that you do, like you said, have some type of written agreement or contract that states, these are my roles. This is what I put in. This is what I'm doing. This is, what I'm not doing or whatnot, because I know partnerships they seem like they can get real real tricky if you don't
Mhm.
uh you know be wise in your decision making.
That's true. You got to be really careful. Which again, like you said, just have that written agreement instead of just functioning as an oral partnership pursuant to some oral agreement. Have a written agreement, something that you can point to. And if something happens in the middle of the partnership that might not be, catastrophic, you can just go point to the agreement and say, hey, remember, this is what we agreed to do. So let's do this. I think it's important to have that.
With in that same vein, I know we're gonna dive into I guess limited partnership and LLC. Yeah, I would love you to expound on those two as well.
So really with a limited partnership, and you see a lot of these basically when people want to fund projects, and they're sort of, you sort of want to be an investor. So you'll invest, for instance, a construction project. Say you were going to build or construct a large building. So you'll have a bunch of owners or a bunch of partners who are actually managing the project. But then you may want to have some limited partners who have invested, and but those particular partners, they've invested, but they don't want the liability that's associated with managing and making decisions. And so with a limited partnership, they have to sign a limited partnership agreement. And what that limited partnership agreement does is it gives them limited liability. But in exchange for that, they can't have any role in managing um, the enterprise.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Before we move on to LLCs and maybe why to do a LLC, if you are watching right now, drop in the chat what type of business entity you have. Are you a sole prop? Are you a LLC? Are you a S corp? Do you have a partnership? I would love to know that. That way that me and Leonard can continue to direct the conversation based off of the individuals watching. But so Leonard, why would somebody maybe choose the LLC, which I know a lot of entrepreneurs do that?
Well, LLC is very flexible. It can be member managed, or it can be managed by managers. So you can have a board, a manager's board, and you can have directors. Um, so you've got those two options. The other thing is that with a LLC, you have some options in regards to taxes. You can pass through the tax. You can pass through the taxes if you'd like to your own personal tax. And a lot of times where that comes into play is if, for instance, the percentage that you pay on your personal taxes is lower than the percentage that you would pay if you didn't pass it through the entity to your personal income tax. So if the entity is being taxed at a higher rate than what you're being taxed at individually, that could come in handy. So people do it for that reason, for those reasons. Um, LLC is, I mean, like a lot of people use LLCs. It's great. Um, but like I said, there's some tax benefits to it. One thing about all of this, I would tell everybody, and I think I've told this to you before, is I'd always recommend, if you can, get an accountant for the tax issues that you're going to face, because you believe it or not, there's a lot of money that can get sucked up with taxes, and there's some ways to be able um, to manage that. So get a good accountant.
Okay. Okay. Very cool. Well, and that is one thing you and I discussed prior to hopping on the live here is the point of an accountant. You know, I guess speak to those who are starting off, maybe bootstrapping. They are, saying, "Hey, I'm a QuickBooks pro. I haven't needed an accountant, and I don't think I'm ever need an accountant." But tell me, why, from your expertise, why you think it's important to get an accountant?
I just think that accountant makes sure that you're doing the right things. One thing about, so if you are going to create an entity, in order to get the benefits of the limited liability, I mean, you've got to form it properly. It's got to be formed properly, and it's got to be managed properly and maintained properly. So there are different forms that you have to file. There's taxes that you have to pay annually, and you got to make sure you're doing those things. When you create your LLC or your corporation or whatever entity you're going to create, in most instances, you're going to have to file with the state, and in a lot of you're going to ultimately have to file annual statements, which have a fee. You're going to have to file excise. You're going to have to file excise or pay excise tax,
Mm-hmm.
franchise tax.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that your accountant will do is make sure that to remind you and to make sure all those things are getting paid.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I will tell you, just as an aside, when you get ready to file your articles of incorporation, for your LLC, you're going to need, I would recommend you get a registered agent. Registered agent is basically somebody that's going to receive all of your mail from the state, corporate mail. If somebody wants to sue you, and they can go to they can go to this registered agent instead of just showing up at your personal location and serving you. Um,
You're talking
but
about a
the
registered agent with the state.
registered, like a registered agent is so there are plenty of companies out there that are registered agents, that will basically get all of your corporate material. There are also some of
Yep.
them, the really good ones, will remind you that you need to file your annual statements because they will get that in. If you haven't filed, um, the state will send that in. Will send a notice to them, and because that's who you designated to receive those notices. So.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay, cool. Well, so everybody watching, I know we got a bunch of LLCs. I see them all in the chat there. And CJ actually has an LLC and a nonprofit. So we'll dive into nonprofits here in just a second. But as you heard, Leonard mentioned three things right off the bat that you need to be thinking about when you do form a business entity and more specifically a LLC. You're going to have franchise tax, you're going to have excise tax, you're going to have an annual report fee, I believe. So with that
Mhm.
being said, you need to be making some money. You know, don't don't dive into business and just be excited to be a business owner and you're not out there, building a business and generating some revenue. Because regardless of the lack of revenue that you bring in, the IRS is going to make sure that they get what they need, and that's for certain. So I do want to talk about, I guess, the nonprofit side of the house a little bit and kind of what that comes with. I know nonprofits, I guess there are a lot of myths maybe about nonprofits and how they can be operated. But what do you think about nonprofits in those business entities?
I think nonprofits are great as long as people remember, a couple things. Number one is the nonprofit is not a for-profit, which means that you're not the owners don't run the nonprofit per se. The nonprofit is run by the board of directors, and now the owners, there's no owner, but the founders can
Hmm.
certainly work at the nonprofit, and the founder can also take a salary at the nonprofit. But the decisions that are being made at the nonprofit, pursuant to whatever nonprofit the agreement that you made, the operating agreement that you have, but the board of directors ultimately runs the nonprofit, and so you got to have a good board of directors. Um, One of the things I'd recommend is, for instance, have a good lawyer on the board of directors, especially for a nonprofit. They, have a good accountant on the board of directors. Have some people on the board of directors that have some expertise in some of the areas that you're going to need.
Hmm.
Um, and that way you'll kind of help yourself in the sense of cutting down on some of the funds that you might have to pay in order to go out and get that expertise.
Yeah.
Um,
What is the and sorry if I missed this. What is the protection as far as a nonprofit? Are you familiar with that?
so in terms of nonprofits and the protection, you also can do. you can have some. There are some limited liability protections with the
Okay.
nonprofit as well,
Okay. Good to
but
know.
again, with nonprofits, the biggest thing is that generally comes up with nonprofits is you want to make sure that you're running those properly. Um, Otherwise, if you start running them similar to a for-profit business, then you're going to be held to those requirements
Gotcha. Gotcha. Understood. Okay. Good.
and
Kind of
consequences. And
yeah.
consequences. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I can imagine. One statement that we have from our audience is Cece has a audio visual company, and she's about to expand her business to add a small staff. And she's interested in establishing an S corp. Can you kind of run through the S corp
So
entity?
really, with an S corp, an S corp has a lot of restrictions, but primarily what an S corp is, it's where the shareholders have elected to be treated as a partnership for tax purposes. So, but you still have a limited number of shareholders. So with a corporation, um, you can take on you can take on you can take on a larger number of shareholders. With an S corporation, the number of shareholders, and there are other restrictions to an S corp. Sometimes I think with S corps, you can own the company. You can't have certain um, individuals having management positions within the company, for instance. But there are restrictions to an S corporation. But with an S corporation, which is one of the good things about it, like I said, you can be taxed as a partnership, and if you get to a point where you want it, where you're ready to build your company, you can always take out that pass through tax provision, which treats it as a partnership for tax purposes, and basically it will convert into a corporation. And then you can go out and start raising money and doing whatever you want to do in order to fund a much larger business.
Very good. Very good. Thank you for that insight. Everyone watching, as Leonard and I kind of round the corner here, make sure that you pop in the chat any questions that you have. We have a lawyer on the line right now in the midst. So if you're wondering, I quite don't know this about my business entity. I'm not sure this. I don't want to make this mistake or run into this roadblock or pitfall. Make sure you pop that question in the chat here. Leonard, I would love to dive into I guess some of the important legal requirements for each of these. I know we've hit on them a little bit, but I love to reiterate them if you don't mind.
Yep. So one of the things I think we talked about earlier is the piercing the corporate veil.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to create a legal entity, the one thing you have to do in order to make sure that someone that wants to sue is unable to get to your personal fortune is you want to make sure, number one, you don't make personal guarantees. If you're making personal guarantees or signing personal guarantees, they're going to be able to get to you personally, your personal fortune. If you've incurred certain tax obligations, again, that would fall on you personally. Or if you've committed some sort of torturous act, assault, something, some sort of assault, or you've discriminated or something like that directly, they can attempt to pierce the corporate veil or attempt to get at you personally for your
Leonard,
act.
and just to hold that thought, when you say a personal guarantee, so for instance, if it's Jaren, but Jaren owns a mobile detail company, I shouldn't say, hey, I am going to come and wash your car. Should I say, can you expound on the personal guarantee
So
part?
a personal guarantee generally has to do with a lot of times I'll give you an example. If you're going out to borrow money, sometimes they'll ask that you sign a personal guarantee
Yep.
versus signing a guarantee on behalf of the company.
Yep.
Sometimes they
Yep.
want a personal guarantee from you. And when you sign that personal guarantee, the reason why they're asking you is so that they don't have to, they're not limited to just coming after the company. They can also come after you, for instance, if you don't make the payments. Um, but that's one of the things, one of the
Gotcha.
things that to help you to stay out of that situation, number one, you want to be adequately capitalized. You want to sign on behalf of your company. So make sure when you sign, you're basically saying, you know, uh, Jaron Spicer signing on behalf of uh,
Gotcha.
the company. Um, no personal guarantee.
Separation.
Correct. You want separation is a good word. You want to keep your assets separate. So for
Yep.
everybody, make sure you got a bank account that is only for the business. Separate
Yeah,
your
there we go.
personal money from the business money. So you
Yep.
definitely want to have separate bank accounts. Obey the rules. Be diligent in compliance, paying your taxes, things of that nature. Those are things that will help to make sure that the corporate veil is not pierced. Um, you definitely need to form the company properly, file all the proper paperwork. Um, Otherwise, you know, if you do all those things, you'll protect your shareholders and members from, you know, you'll protect them from people piercing the corporate veil and coming after their personal fortunes.
Gotcha. And I want to piggyback that, man. That's great information. I'm glad you mentioned that again. The importance of separation here. I want to go back to one of our original questions that Cece had about doing that S corp. So she was saying and asking, and this is I don't know if you can answer this without just having an opinion. She was saying, should she maybe instead of doing an S corp, just do a regular corporation? What can you, I guess, just give us the difference of the S corp and the C, I guess, C corp?
The
There we go.
biggest difference is with an S corporation, you can pass it through. You can pass it through to your, you know, you can treat they'll for tax purposes, they'll treat it as a partnership, and so it can pass through to your own, you know, to the partner's own personal income tax.
Hmm.
And again, we talked about that earlier. Whether your tax rate is higher than the tax rate or lower than the tax rate for the company will dictate how you want to, you know, whether you want to do that. Again, S corp has a lot of restrictions too. So with
Is
the
C
S
C
corp,
corp less restrictive?
it has its own restrictions, but it's less restrictive in certain ways. In terms of her question though, it would just really come down to, you know, you'd probably have to sit down with an attorney. They'd have to look at your company, look at what you're attempting to do, look at what type of company you have, and make a determination based on several factors and advising you on whether or not this is something that you should do, whether or not you should do the S corp versus the C corp. Like I said, if you do an S corp, at some point you could decide that you no longer want to pass through the pass through tax treatment, and if you did away with that, then you know ultimately you can convert your S corp into a C corp. But
Mm.
again, I would recommend sitting down with counsel and just going through, you know, your business, your, you know, what you see for your business, your future projections, and try to determine, you know, whether or not you're ready to do a C corp, whether your partners or people that are in it with you are ready to do a C corp, and you know, go about it that way.
Okay. Well, CC, you heard it here first. Reach out to me if you want to try to get with some counsel, and we'll make that happen. Or if you want to do some more, I guess, research on your own. Question we had, Kay was asking. So as we start to add part-time help for the businesses like virtual assistants, social media help, etc., what contract employee docs or safeguards do we need to be aware of?
So I will tell you, you're going to need to do. It depends on who. If you're hiring independent contractors, you're going to want to get some contracts in place so that those people are not deemed to be employees. So there are requirements for independent contractors, documents that you're going to need to that they can submit to you. Um, and most independent contractors understand that they know, you know, if they're independent contractors, that there are certain for instance tax documents that they need to have. But you need to be aware of all of those things so that those individuals, and do it properly so those individuals aren't deemed employees. So if something goes wrong, they're not deemed employees of the company, they're deemed independent contractors. um, you also, depending on what type of company you have, you may want them to sign non-disclosure agreements. So
Hmm.
you may if you have certain for instance, a software company, they may have certain intellectual property that they are, or if you're a company and you have a certain way of a certain process that you do, you may not want everybody else to know what your process is, and so you may want to have an NDA in place as well.
Gotcha, gotcha. And Shayna popped it in the chat, but this is a good time to, I guess, promote the fact that next week we have an actual contracts class that is on the 29th. I hope I have the date right, but you guys have received the email. So if you haven't signed up for that and you are asking or wanting to know more about contracts, make sure that you sign up for it. It is a limited availability class and it is limited capacity. That's why it's limited availability. So sign up for that and we'll get your contracts questions answered right on the spot again from another one of our legal friends. So I guess as oh, here we go. There's another question. I'll get that question answered in a second. But as we wrap up this discussion, Leonard, I know there were a few legal requirements that you already mentioned, which was the annual statements. And I guess this is something again that an accountant will remind you of probably. Franchise tax, excise tax, uh, your EIN, which you need. So if you
You don't
don't
have
have
to.
a federal EIN, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're going to need a FEIN
Yep.
number, and that's how you're going to pay your taxes, and that's
Right.
how they're going to identify you. In most instances, it's essentially a social security number for your company.
Yep. Yep. Perfect. And then insurance. That's one thing we didn't talk about. I know.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. Let's dive into insurance just a little bit and the importance of that. But I know a lot of entrepreneurs don't. Not that they don't want to have insurance. It's just not the top thing on their to-do list is to get that insurance.
yeah, it's important, especially if you got brick and mortar, you definitely need insurance.
Right. Right.
You know,
Right.
if somebody slips on your property, believe me, if the right person slips on your property, they are probably in this society, which is very litigious, are going to be looking to sue, are going to be looking for some type of compensation, and so you definitely need, if you got brick and mortar, you definitely need insurance. I would tell you that anything where you're directly interacting with the public, where again, it's a risk another just it's another risk assessment, because what insurance does is help to mitigate risk, and for the most part, that's what businesses are always. A lot of what businesses, besides profiting, they're trying to mitigate their risk,
Mm,
because the more you can mitigate your risk, the less you're going to have. The less risk you're going to have to your profit margin. And so yeah, insurance, I definitely would recommend it for anybody. When you talked about the food vendors, I would recommend having insurance
right. Yeah. That. Yeah.
for a professional, whether it's an architect. Most professionals have to have some form of malpractice insurance, but for a consultant, a lot of times consultants aren't necessarily defined in that way. But if you're consulting with people, and you've got risk, and because a lot of times, if you're somebody that's offering a service where you're actually advising people, sometimes things happen, not because you told them that something wrong, but just because something happened. And a lot of times people don't want to hear that, well, I told you the right thing, and something intervening just took place. People still will they want to be compensated, and so I would still recommend that you get some insurance.
Yeah. Um, and this may or may not be a question that we can get answered here, but I do know somebody who potentially could answer. But would you happen to know if vendors at an event are those considered independent contractors
Yeah, most vendors are considered independent contractors. Yes,
of the person putting on the event?
yes, they're because you're contracting with that individual. You're not an employee. In most instances, I'm gonna say you're not an employee of
Right.
they're hiring you for that particular event. You're just like other
Gotcha.
other contractors.
Gotcha. All right. There we go. There's the answer to that question. So you okay. So they need to sign some type of, I guess, contract stating that.
You
Um,
should. Now, I will tell you, and again, I don't know all the details. I would tell you
yep,
again that those things need to be, you need to be worked out, and you may need to sit down with
legal.
counsel to get
Yep,
a full understanding of what your rights are. But in most instances, if you're going to hire a vendor, you need to have some sort of vendor contract, and
yep.
and vendors come with different pay requirements. They come with different tax form. I mean, it's you need to follow the procedures for dealing with independent contractors, if that's what you intend to do. And I would, and I my suspicion is that most companies, when they hire a vendor for something like an event, they're not hiring them to be an employee. They're hiring them to be an independent contractor.
There you go. And there's that word mentioned again, contract. So next week, the 29th, we have the contracts class. So come in and at least get the wording and verbiage on your contracts right, in front of a lawyer who's been doing it for a while and can assist you with that. Um, as Leonard and I wrap up, Leonard, I would love to kind of know, you know, what are, I guess, some parting words that you would tell new entrepreneurs when it comes to deciding about a business entity, and just a few things that they really need to keep top of mind? Maybe just a one, two, three of choose this
So
entity because of this, and don't choose or choose it for that.
So the number one thing I think you've got to remember when in choosing an entity is you have to really consider what your company is and what your goals are. If one of your goals, for instance, is you want limited liability, well, you're not gonna be a sole proprietorship or a general partnership. You're going to choose an entity that affords you the ability to have limited liability. If you want to be able to pass the taxes through to your income tax, your personal income tax, because your personal income tax has a lower rate than the tax on the business, corporate tax, then you're going to want to choose an entity which allows you to be able to do that as well. If you want to be a manager, if you want to be a to be able to actually manage your business, then you're going to want to choose an entity um, that allows you to manage your business. And so those are really the three big things in trying to determine what type of entity you want to have. The biggest thing I would say in terms of formation of business is just at the end of the day, you really want to protect what you're building. And so the more risk you take on, the more you've got to protect,
Hmm.
because the more there are more things out there that can derail you. And so I would, you have to weigh your risk, balance everything, and then make your decisions with your accountant and in counsel. And that would be my advice.
I love that. As we wrap up, if everybody on the live could drop in the chat, thank you, Leonard, because he was phenomenal today. So a few things that Leonard just mentioned. Make sure you understand your goals when it comes to forming your business entity. Know exactly what you want to do, why you want to do it, and how you want to do it. That will help you get to the correct business entity. Also, seek out legal counsel. Some of this stuff we don't know, but there are professionals with expertise who have the answers. Make sure you get an accountant. You don't want to miss out on paying certain taxes. You don't want to miss certain fees. You don't want to pay more than you need to. So that's going to be important down the line, especially as you guys scale and grow. And protection, protect yourself at all times, especially with this business. Separation, that's one of the main through lines of this entire conversation, is separate yourself from the business entity, especially your money. Do not commingle. You'll get in trouble for that. So I hope that those of you who joined today got a lot out of this. I hope you took many notes. Leonard, again, I am excited and happy to continue to reshare this conversation. I think it was good. I know me and you got some other work that we are doing as far as another aspect of this, and we'll tell you about that a little bit later on. That's an exciting thing that we're building out. Leonard, hold tight for me. But to my corner to corner family, Leonard and I are about to pop off. Leonard, when you go back and look at this, you'll see there's a lot of thank yous in here. So that's
Appreciate
exciting.
Appreciate it,
Yeah.
everyone.
And yeah, like I said, Leonard, hold tight for me. But my corner to corner family, uh, remember, excuse me, next week, the 29th, we have the contracts class. Next month for my corner to corner alumni, we have financial literacy month. So we talking about money, money, money. I hope you are ready to get your money right. And Shane and I have been planning a big class that we're working on with one of our other partners, and hopefully we are able to launch that, and it'll be maybe limited again because I'm sure a lot of people want to get active in that. But we're about to hop off. Leonard, hold on one second. But corner to corner family, I will see you guys soon. Take it easy. Bye bye.